Okay, here's a recent recreation of a woman that lived 28,000 years ago. You can see her appearance, so things really haven't changed much. Genetics also show that a lot of the haplogroups, including the haplogroup of Cro-Magnon man, is still extant today. It's the reason they've changed the name of Cro-Magnon man into early European modern humans. Let's look into this a little bit deeper here as we see her. She lived 28,000 years ago, and it's a site known Dolly Vesta, and it was discovered in 1922, and it appears that cultures is attached to the Gravettian culture. It existed from around 30,000 years ago to around 35,000 years ago, and not that they disappeared in any way, but they slowly changed to be different people. This is one of the artifacts that's found associated with it, and it's a symbol of Venus and the mother goddess, and you can tell that she is a matronly or a motherly lady. There are even marks that are done on this horn that she's holding next to her that appear to correlate to the cycles of the moon, which also conspicuously go along with the fertility cycle of women, as we say. So it's a pretty interesting site here, and they have all kinds of artifacts that are shown here. This is one done in ivory, showing a person here, where of course rotted over time, but they put it back together the way that it pretty much looked at the time. And it's unique in the fact that it has these rich artifacts, markings, and objects. In 1925, the famous figure of the Vestonica Venus was found also associated in this area, and we can see the earliest depictions of a Venus or a mother type of goddess. Now when we look at things like this compared to our modern depictions that we think of as Venus, well, it's two different things, but of course one of those is looked at as being a young maiden, and then the other is looked at as being a grown woman. But here's what's known as Vestonica Venus. It was found with it also. And here the woman was buried and discovered to be actually in a fetal position, totally covered with red ochre, which makes many connections that we've talked about before from previous to this time all the way through and into even a modern time, or a much more modern time than we're thinking of other than 28,000 BC. She was also facing to the west toward the rising of the sun. And this gives another idea that that idea had been going on a long time. But if you think that's the extent of it, I can show you a 70,000-year-old burial that's very conspicuously like this, and it showed the same type of thing. So pretty interesting to go through it, but this was found in 1949, this skeleton here that you see. Of course, she has no prognathism or anything, even at this point at 28,000 BC. Small nasal slit and so on. So they took this and made a recreation off of it. And if you noticed before, her hair was kind of auburn colored. I don't know if that was pointed out on the genetics or not for them to give so, but I would think it would be. And then they just gave her inconspicuous brownish eyes, which would have been real common during that time. But so red ochre covered this whole thing, and then they had mammoth shoulder blades shown in here, pelvic bones and so on. And so here's the lady making a recreation of what she might have looked like at the time here. They say that she was somewhere between 36 and 45, probably a mother herself. And those mammoth shoulder blades were shown to be the age, or shown to have markings and scribblings on those too. So it looked like it is, in a way, planned burial, and looking like it had something to do with resurrection, having to hook up to the red ochre burials that we've looked at so many times throughout the years here on this. So anthropology and paleontology and all science got together and made a recreation of what she looked like. Of course, this point is hairless. And so you can see her appearance here. They said that her body was pretty graceful for that area, and that also she had sustained a wound that broke her jaw, but became repaired in, and so her jaw was kicked off a little bit. So she might have had a way of speaking that looked kind of like Drew Barrymore or something, with that wobbling jaw whenever she spoke, but it didn't keep her from being able to go on up through her life here much after it. But she suffered from that, and that made her face a little asymmetrical, a little not the same on both sides, and you can kind of see that depiction down here where it's kicked her jaw off to the left a little bit in this look. But I think it's pretty interesting to show her here, this Auburnish type hair mixed in and so on. And where it was found again is way up here in the Czech Republic. It was discovered again in 1922, as I said before, and this is attached to the Gravetin culture. And with that, we get all these other connections. And radiocarbon date, the site is unique because at this early of a time, they have depictions of horned warriors and things that are all done in this pegging inside of this art that's done on ivory at a point, and on rocks and things too. So quite unique, especially for the time. This reminds me of Sung Gear Man that I did a video about not too long ago, where he was wearing a brimmed hat that had shells all over it, a coat that also had was adorned with shells all over it and trimmed, and he was wearing pants and things and boots at the time, which is pretty incredible. Almost made a look that looked like Santa Claus, if you will, there with the white shells all adoring it, rather than being fur that we're familiar with Santa Claus. But this Gravetian lady here is, of course, been found with different types of art. Vestonica Venus was found here, and again, she was born or buried in a burial that was covered with red ochre in 1949. Pretty interesting. Skeleton was buried in an embryonic position, as I said before, covered in red ochre, with mammoth bones, with pelvic bones, and shoulder blades of mammoths. Of course, those were well around at this time, and when you look at this skull that she has here, one can easily tell her thin nasal slit that's done onto it, but also you can see her phenotype somewhat, and you can also see that there's a lot of red ochre in her eye sockets and really adorning the head here. Her teeth were pretty good shape, but it looked like the front teeth that are kind of worn down. Those aren't done for chewing, so it looked like it was done for her making clothes and products and tugging on different animal pelts and so on like that, and stitching, because they found needles even back to this date. And when a lot of people look at stuff like this, they think, well, that's a much more recent time. But as I've shown you here recently and long ago, there's a lot of burials that go way farther back, and a lot of this technologically advanced people that we think about in a much more modern times, a lot of this was coming from a much more earlier time than that. Again, they have this recreation of her, 36 to 45 years old. She's quite graceful or whatever, even though having early in her lifetime somehow, and of course people can project onto that all kinds of things, what maybe was the cause for that. But again, this is a Gravetin woman that lived 28,000 years ago or more, and this is a recreation of her. Let me know what you think down below. Peace.